Never confuse education with intelligence. What are some real-life examples of this? Story 1. I work in mental health and have known so many healthcare professionals with advanced degrees who I wouldn't trust to take care of a goldfish and can't believe they counsel people on a regular basis. It's concerning to encounter mental health professionals with advanced degrees who lack the necessary practical skills and empathy. Effective communication and genuine understanding are vital in counseling, emphasizing the importance of ongoing training and evaluation in the field. Yes, I often wonder if the people who get into that do it so they can understand emotion. I work in healthcare and deal with a lot of different departments. Day-to-day, mental health practitioners are hard to distinguish from their patients. It's almost like they get into it to figure their own stuff out. I work in software and have a PhD. At my company, to be anything above a mid-manager, you need a doctorate of some capacity, be it a DBA, JD, or PhD. I've seen one or two other random ones floating around. The number of people who have PhDs in software and don't understand the basics of computer science is alarming. I had a guy tell me that a graphics card is a waste of money because software is always faster than hardware. That's before we get into the people who have BS, MS, and PhD in science and then believe the world is only 6,000 years old. Carbon dating is a myth, and that there was a literal flood where Noah actually loaded animals on the ark. In fact, a lot of them traveled to this museum in Tennessee where there are allegedly parts of the ark. Story 2. Heard about a mechanical engineer who is a flat earther. So yeah, him or any engineer, physicist, or astronomer that believes in that. The fact that a single one can get their degree and then turn around years later and believe in something fundamentally incompatible with the basic physics required to make sense of their degree is baffling. It's from a fictional podcast that uses real-world items, people, etc. as part of its setting, but here's a quote from it. Everyone thinks they're too smart to get involved in a cult. I'm sure you do. You think that of the first mention of aliens, or the end of the world, or the lost book of the Bible where Jesus buried his holy staff in the foothills of the Himalayas, you'd go running. Trouble is, that misunderstands how it works. I mean, when I was with the Divine Chain, some of the smartest people there were also the most committed. Intelligence doesn't make you less prone to taking on bad ideas. It just makes you better at defending them to other people and to yourself. Smart people can believe some truly ridiculous things and then deploy all the reason and logic at their disposal to justify them, because a belief doesn't begin in your mind, it begins with your feelings. Cults are very good at finding you when you're at your lowest point, when you're most emotionally vulnerable, and when you're at that point, it's astounding what can crawl into your heart and start to fester there. In my opinion, people who are truly smart have a much better grasp on just how little they know. It's the reason that you think you know everything when you're a child or teenager. You genuinely don't know how much you don't know. So, someone who is above average in intelligence has that same phenomenon we all experience with age, but on a slightly larger scale. We all grow up and realize how easily we can be wrong, but really smart people have that experience more often. It seems like it sometimes makes them more willing to grant outlandish things that seem absurd and obviously wrong, but they are in a strange way engaging in intelligent thought, accepting that you don't have all the answers and that the world is far stranger than it seems. It's a bit of a backfire, but it makes a weird kind of sense to me. This is what I was saying the other day in a thread relating to Brexit. I remember pointing out a very obvious logical contradiction in a Leave talking point to a very intelligent friend of mine. Rather than put his usual analytical skills to use, he got angry. I think in some people, emotion can override logic circuits more easily than in others. I do think some people can genuinely say they are less likely to get involved in a cult or be fooled, but it's not because they think they are impervious to manipulation. It's because they acknowledge that they are fallible, and so do a better job of monitoring the situation. Those who are arrogant or ignorant enough to believe they can't be fooled are the most likely to fall for the manipulation they can't see. Story 3. Helped some mates move house. One was a university student doing a double degree in computer science in something very challenging. While we were packing boxes, he asked if he could borrow a saw. When I asked why, it was so that he could shorten the legs on the dining table so it would fit in the door. The look on his face when I grabbed one of the legs and started unscrewing it was priceless, as was the look when I asked him how he thought they got it in the room in the first place. I worked for a moving company on the central coast of California. The amount of times we were able to surprise people in millionaire, sometimes billionaire level homes, and they were shocked at how we were able to either move a piece of furniture through narrow doors or hallways, was astronomical. This doesn't surprise me, but don't think for a second movers get out of this. When I first moved to the US, Florida from the UK, a local moving company arrived to perform the last leg of our international shipment. While chatting to one of the movers about us arriving from the UK, his first question was, "Did you drive?" Story 4. In my old university in Germany, in the early 2000s, the university was old, really old. And when I started, they just began modernizing the lecture halls, etc. The German department got a new fancy state-of-the-art lecture hall with any kind of technology you could wish for. The professors got extensive training on how to use it. There were some of them who, after 3 months, still didn't know how to switch on the lights. Don't even talk about the microphone or how to open and close the blinds on the skylight. They didn't originally plan on having an overhead projector there, but after a few weeks they relented and provided one because the professors didn't know any other way. In their defense, the other lecture halls were so old that they still had the hole for the inkwell in the tables. I had an evolutionary biologist teacher in college who used an overhead, and it was amazing. He used one of those plastic scroll things so that he could write and move on. It was amazing because it caused him to slow down, he talked and wrote, and it gave us all time to follow along and write along. He also had those scanned, and we could get them online if we missed a day or missed a bit. He would write it out so that he would constantly have to be there and present, rather than just rote reading or not talking about a section. One of the best lectures I ever saw, coincidentally by an evolutionary biologist, was by a guy who used handwritten overheads. Helps that the guy was brilliant, but his slides really added a lot. On the other hand, I've seen tons of slickly presented talks that I didn't believe a word of, and cool tech didn't add anything to it. Count among these several TED Talks, which were like crappy infomercials. Story 5. My roommate in college was/is an academic genius, 35 ACT in med school right now, etc. I brought him to Walmart with me because he wanted to buy an 8-pack of Gatorade. At the self-checkout, he scanned one, saw the price was $7, and decided that must have been the price for each Gatorade. He ended up scanning the pack 7 more times and paid $56 for some Gatorade, all while thinking that was a fair price. If he never bought it before, this isn't that wild. It's totally within the realm of possibility that some drinks will cost more than others. Consider wine or coffee. Of course, the good stuff is always costing more. Story 6. I think people have a hard time grasping this, but most people are just very ignorant about the vast majority of things. Not because people are inherently stupid, but because we live in a very complex and specialized society. You can take the dumbest plumber in my country, and I bet he is still more knowledgeable about plumbing than 90% of people, because he has experience and knowledge in that specific field. While on the contrary, a PhD in whatever super specific science is, that super specific, and even a well-educated person would be complete idiot compared to them when it comes to the specifics. Yes, try to take a medical doctor and put them in a science lab, and they're like a baby. But that works both ways. Intelligence is more about how you apply your noggin to the tasks relevant to your own life and ambitions. IQ doesn't require depth or breadth of knowledge. It's more about critical thinking in the elements of your own life. Even simple things we think everyone should know may not be common knowledge to someone who spends all day in a lab, even if that person is fixing the world in seemingly impossible ways. I'm not trying to say that nobody is stupid. There are indeed many stupid people, even stupid PhDs, but really judging someone's intelligence based on observing them doing a few stupid things is probably not a holistic enough picture. Sometimes it is challenging to see someone who is very intelligent, smart, and educated in one field, and therefore assumes it must be true in all fields. Always right can never be wrong, will put down others regularly, and can't see that others can bring value to a situation. It's hard to witness. Story 7. Ironically, most of the staff at the university I graduated from. The problem is, they get into teacher's assistant roles during their education, transition into junior associates after they graduate, and just climb the ranks from there, often without any real working experience whatsoever. This culminated in my group project, which was 90% creating technical documentation and more than 50% of the workload for that semester. 16 out of 30 ECTs, if you're in the EU, was taught by a woman who asked us to not send her project drawings in DWG, standard industry format for vector graphics used by, among other apps, AutoCAD, because she's never used AutoCAD in her life. The sad thing thing, she was actually one of the better teachers there. Ha, I was going to ask literally anyone who's ever worked for a university's IT department. I've never met a group of people more unwilling to learn anything new outside of their small specialization than university professors. These people would rather argue with you for 10 minutes than, "I did restart my computer," than just spend the 2 minutes to restart the computer when the logistics software is showing the machine with a 45-day uptime, and all of us can see that. Department heads do this. In the defense of some of those faculty, the way some departments/colleges fund their IT equipment, it may very well take 10 minutes for their computer to reboot. In a couple of my coworkers' colleges, it's not unusual to find tenure-track faculty still using decade-old PCs with spinning drives. Sure, the computer technically is back up in 3 minutes or so, but the forced launch of Skype, Teams, FireEye, and the rest is going to lock things down for another 5 to 10 minutes. Story 8. My classmate who graduated with honors and had the highest GPA in the entire college was not able to hold a job because she was only book smart. 3 years later, I was the one who did her interview. I was an average student, and she failed it due to lack of clinical knowledge. I know a person like this, who had an eidetic memory, very smart, and could reference anything, but to this day, the job that he's held is something that most will get out of high school. I think one of the biggest challenges is his inability to focus and his lack of drive, and I think the fact that he is intelligent plays a role. Girl I grew up with finished college with a 3.9 GPA, finished dental school at the top of her class. She was known for being ditzy and dumb growing up, to the point where her brother and I, neighbors, were constantly wondering how dumb she was. Turns out, she's just not street smart or has a high social IQ, but anything in teeth, and I am out of my depth for sure. Her dedication to her academia was impressive. I'll still consider her to be an idiot, too much empirical evidence to disregard. I've seen her do/say too much dumbass stuff, but at the end of the day, so am I. Story 9. My wife has a PhD and is absolutely awesome, working in a challenging and rewarding field. However, she is clearly an idiot, as she thinks I'm smart and married me. So far, she hasn't worked it out. Not saying this applies to you, but there are fascinating stories of super intelligent, highly successful women who are in abusive relationships. I remember this podcast about an ER doctor who worked with an abused woman and could not see that her own relationship was abusive, physically and mentally. Wild. Edit for a word. This is funny to me. My husband says I'm one of the smartest people he's ever met, but I have absolutely no common sense whatsoever. He's right. I'd probably be dead by now from something wholly idiotic if he didn't keep watch. Story 10. My friend is one of those, PhD in the medical field. On New Year's evening, he lit fireworks, threw away the lighter, and the fireworks went off in his hand. And he wasn't drunk. His wife literally forbade him to touch any fireworks ever again. Possibly the most famous interventional radiologist in Australia among the rank-and-file doctor plebs like myself, from Canberra, I think, we've all heard of him, can do all sorts of interventional procedures with one hand many others can't do with two. Possibly on account of an accident with fireworks, on the other hand, when he was 16 or so. The other most famous doctor in Australia among us mere doctors, seriously, we were stranded on an Air New Zealand flight on the runway in New Zealand and got to talking about him with the people in the seat behind us whom we'd never met before, was a heart surgeon in his 40s who inherited so much money he immediately retired. Considering that's around the age a lot of heart surgeons just finish their training and they earn a hell of a lot per year, that must have been one hell of a big inheritance. But why go through all of that training just to retire? Even if he inherited an infinite money glitch, he didn't inherit an infinite lifespan, probably, and he spent half of his becoming adept at this exclusive, respected power of life and death discipline. And he quits when he finally gets through the most grueling, least rewarding, least autonomous part of it. I mean, I'm just a pleb's pleb, so I'm certain I can't truly conceptualize the pressures that motivate such a decision. But if you even took note of it, would you say most doctors, or even most ex-specialists, if that's more reasonable a question, would make that same choice given they suddenly received more money than God? Surely if somebody is smart enough to be a doctor, there are easier careers available to them that are more lucrative to boot. For most people, the entire point of having a high-paying job is so that you can retire early and not work into your 80s. I wouldn't care how much I had trained, how much I had spent on training, or how well I got trained to do a job. The instant I have enough money to not need a job, it will be done. Story 11. My grandmother was a registered nurse, yet she thought the best soap for my sister's bubble bath was dish soap. My mom said her skin ended up so dry it soaked up lotion almost instantly. Knowing tons of nurses, it's always baffled me how much people overestimate their medical knowledge. They're generally very intelligent, but the training in medicine, science, sociology, etc. is really quite superficial. There was a historical inflection point at which the average quality of nurses took a nosedive for a good reason. My mother wanted to be a doctor. She is very intelligent, loves medicine, and wants to help people. Unfortunately, she graduated high school in 1966. Gender discrimination in medical schools, scholarships, hiring, etc. meant that she was effectively blocked, so she became an RN. Today, more than half of all newly minted medical doctors each year in the US are women. Those kinds of highly intelligent, highly capable women used to become nurses because that was the best they could hope for. Today, they become doctors instead, and nurses are drawn from a less talented pool. It's a major factor in education as well, though not from a talent perspective. Women who were STEM-minded in the past often went into education because it one of the few options open to them. Now they just become scientists, and there is a massive need for teachers in those fields. Story 12. Getting a PhD requires you to be good at a very specific set of things, and dedicated enough to pursue those things to the exhaustion of everything else for years. This can lead to some experiential gaps. Mathematics is and has long been particularly rife with eccentrics. Read probably neurodivergent, from a time when that wasn't a diagnostic. People who were brilliant in their chosen branch of mathematics but struggled with tasks many of us would consider basic, such as tying one's own shoes. Experiential gaps. LOL. Understatement of the year. I'm not sure I kept up with anything in the past 10 years besides my research field. Tech, pop culture, sports, politics, world events, social media, whatever. I may have heard things in passing, but I'm literally stuck in 2013 in my mind. I'm literally useless outside of my niche scientific field, and I'm tired. So unbelievably tired. I played a social sport with 2 professors of mathematics and one of statistics teaching at a pretty well-regarded university. I didn't really ask what they did because it would make no sense to me. Very smart cookies. They pointed out that there was so much idolatry of the famous eccentrics that it was an issue with people trying to emulate them in the field. Not washing, being rude, keeping weird hours, all in the hopes it would make them seem more like their heroes. A family friend worked at Bell Labs when they were a big deal and always loved to mention how some of the engineers would show up with notes pinned to their shirts. Their wives knew they wouldn't remember important things, so they were notes for their secretaries to intervene and remind them. Super smart at some things to the exclusion of all else. Story 13. Never confuse the fact that a degree is a measure of perseverance and not a measure of intelligence. A degree says very little about your intelligence, but it does say that you completed a multi-year project that required your work output to meet the standards set by a third-party accreditation body. So if you can manage to do that, you can probably show up to meetings on time, have minimal office skills, and can complete assigned work. That is the value of a degree to an employer. Discipline. I was a returning student who was about 15 years older than everyone else with loads of real-life experience, and I have to say the work ethic and discipline of my classmates was truly humbling. That's what sets them apart, not intelligence. Returning student here as well, with the opposite experience, baffled at how many students I'm seeing failing or withdrawing from classes through a total lack of effort or by literally not showing up. I do agree on the work ethic bit for the students who do put in the work, or go above and beyond. Those kids have a bright future ahead of them, and it's refreshing to see. As a PhD, I agree with the first half. It shows that you can manage a project and show up on time and do basic office work aspect. Less so. I found it incredibly difficult to get any kind of entry-level office work after I graduated because HR assumed I was too academic to succeed in a real job. Ended up needing to do a bunch of vocational qualifications afterward to get anything approaching a career going. Story 14. My wife's stepfather was a chemist who currently has diabetes. One night, he went to the ER because his blood sugar was dangerously high. He claimed he was eating well. He normally does not, so there's no reason why his blood sugar was high. In his car was a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale mixed with grape juice. He said that the two canceled their sugars out, and we didn't know what we were talking about because he was a chemist and he knew how to combine things. I didn't know that Steve Jobs was a chemist, but for real, Steve Jobs, by all regarded as one of the most brilliant marketers of all time, time, and when he was diagnosed with a more treatable form of pancreatic cancer, he said, "Screw modern medicine. My organ that regulated blood sugar level, I'll just eat nothing but sugar, fruit, and that'll cure my struggling organ." Like someone with liver disease giving up water and committing only to drink beer. His stupidity in one area led to his death, despite his brilliance in other areas. And here I am, having not gone to college for chemistry or any field of science I'm interested in because I believe I'm not intelligent enough to be any kind of scientist. While I feel like I'm not intelligent, I also kind of wish I was dumber so I could just blindly go into things that other people do and seem to end up just fine. I actually read an article a long time ago that stated dumb people are more successful than intelligent people for this very reason. An intelligent person can envision the difficulties of pursuing something and, as a result, go, "Screw that." A dumb person can't/won't and will just plummet headfirst into something hoping for the best. Story 15. Peter Duesberg, molecular biologist who works as a researcher at UC Berkeley and has an otherwise stellar career and is well known for his work, became an AIDS denialist, claiming there's no link between HIV and AIDS, led countless people down the rabbit hole, including many who were HIV positive. These individuals ended up infecting others and refusing antiretroviral therapies. This included an AIDS denialist activist named Christine Majore who infected her infant through breastfeeding, thinking, "Hey, it's not a big deal, it's just HIV, it doesn't cause AIDS." Carrie Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize for inventing PCR, also questioned the link between HIV and AIDS. I chatted with him on a plane once, and he was indeed pretty dumb. Met him once after a lecture at the university I was working at. It was amazing to me how he stuck to his mantra of just a surfer dude researcher who single-handedly conceived of PR, and conveniently left out the dozens of other scientists and technicians who helped with the preceding work and subsequent refinement of the process. Yeah, it was funny because when I met him, I was seated with him and another scientist on a plane to Boston, of course. I was telling them both about some stuff I did with a fancy at the time version of PCR, and he just listened and then talked about surfing, mostly, and I was thinking, who is this bozo? When I got off the plane, the other scientist was like, "Not every day you meet a Nobel laureate," and I was like, "What? Who was that?" And that's when he told me who it was. He had gotten Mullis's card and gave it to me, and I still have it somewhere. Story 16. I worked with a girl who graduated from Brown. She would never shut up about it. Always Brown this and Brown that. I went to a state school, and it was apparent that she looked down on anyone that didn't attend an Ivy League school. So one day she was doing that, and I couldn't stop myself. I said something like, "Oh, you went to Brown? And yet here we are, together in the same place doing the same job." I was talking to a few coworkers in software engineering about education. Two of these coworkers went to MIT. I said I went to community college and didn't graduate because I got an internship here. The team lead, who went to MIT, pointed at me and said, "He's the smart one of the bunch." I had a coworker like this too. I said the same thing and they finally stopped. I get it, you went to Princeton, yet I'm here taking a full week from my normal duties to try and retrain you so they don't fire you from an incredibly simple job. I would have traded places for their job in an instant. They just entered orders all day. That's it. They were paid $75K a year to input numbers and make sure the correct quantity was set. They didn't have to go out and earn the sales or anything. These things were all set to be produced on a regular basis for very long-term contracts. The same items are being made every year on the same schedule. Somehow, that was too much for them to grasp. One of the days I decided I would just do their job and they would watch. I had all of their orders done in maybe an hour. That was all of their work for like 4 days. I couldn't believe it. It still pisses me off, actually. I asked them, "You put me down for going to a state school, yet I can do your job in an hour when you claim it takes you an entire week. Do you really think having wealthy parents to send you to an expensive school makes you any more capable than the rest of us?" They would put down everyone around them constantly. It was incredibly annoying. She was shocked when one of the product line managers never went to college, like they were somehow suddenly some inept person who couldn't do their job because they didn't go to college. What do people think college is? Some mystical thing that suddenly makes someone a capable genius? Story 17. Not quite a PhD, but I was at a party in the UK full of med students, and stereotypically everyone was off their face drunk, while some guy fell over and broke his collarbone and immediately got rushed by a dozen of them, all fussing and asking him the same questions over and over, and going through the checklist. Half an hour later and he's still on the couch in pain, and I go in to ask if anybody knows why the ambulance is taking so long. Nobody had an answer because nobody had called one. A party full of medical students hadn't called an ambulance or made any transport arrangements for a guy in severe pain with a broken clavicle. Idiots. That's actually super common in emergencies when there's a group of any kind. One of the first things you learn in a lifeguard certification course is to identify a single person to instruct to call 911. Never just yell out, "Someone call 911," or assume that it's been done because everyone in the group is assuming someone else did it already. It's not necessarily that everyone forgot about it, just that everyone assumed it was the logical first step that someone else would have already taken. Singling somebody out tends to work because in an emergency there are 50 random people all wanting to do something to help, but none of them are willing to take charge of the situation for fear of messing it up. Single someone out and you will have taken charge of them and give them something to do that it's hard to be bad at, so they'll do it. Story 18. I worked in IT for a hospital. I was speaking to a doctor who forgot his password. While he was spelling his name phonetically over the phone, he said Z as in xylophone. Needless to say, my eyebrows raised. I work in software development for a major chain of hospitals. One of the executives, MD, asked me to make a substantial UI change to a product owned by McKesson. Them. Just change the colors. It's simple. My teenager could do it. Me. I can make the request of the vendor. Them. That's ridiculous. You just need to go in there and change it. Out of spite, I made the request with the vendor and they came back with a quote that was more than 2 liver transplants. The executive told my CTO I was being difficult and couldn't perform simple tasks. He literally did not understand that vendor software was different from a Wix website. When I worked in hospital administration, I was told I needed to code up a game for iOS and Android from scratch in 2 weeks. This direction came from an MD, a C-level executive, and a lawyer. At the time, I had no coding skills to speak of. I was just a young person who liked computers and could do HTML. I didn't even work in IT. The conversation with them about how that would be impossible was interesting. Story 19. As someone who works security in a hospital, I can say a good 90% of the doctors there are smart but lack any type of common sense, and sometimes I wonder how they function on a day-to-day basis. I work in pension administration, and one of our clients is one of the best universities in the world, and I 100% feel this comment. Some of the professors I deal with have clearly graduated college, done a PhD, and then gone straight into teaching, and they just have no understanding of how the world works outside the framework of a university. The one that really sticks with me, though, is that part of the retirement paperwork we send out contains an explanation of how the early retirement factors work. It says something like, if you retire early, your benefit is reduced by X% per month to reflect the fact it will be paid for a longer time. So for a hypothetical accrued benefit of $1,000, if you retire at age 55, your actual payment amount will be Y dollars. Dude straight up called in to ask why his actual payment wasn't $1,000 since he didn't retire early, so according to his page, it should be $1,000. I'm just like, bro, you've never heard the word hypothetical before? Common sense typically comes from trial and error in real-life experiences. In today's world, in order to become a doctor, the majority of students have to deprive themselves of real-life experience to completely immerse themselves in their studies. Past having sex and drinking/doing some drugs in college, most of them probably have very little experience with the real world. Story 20. I was at a keg party at college, and the gravity keg was set up. Someone complained that the beer was not flowing, so I checked that the keg was still almost full. Turns out someone closed the air intake on top. I opened the intake and poured myself a beer. Problem solved. A few minutes later, someone else complains the beer is out. I told them the keg was full a few minutes ago and it was a tap problem that I fixed. They told me they just came from the keg. I go back to the keg to find the intake was closed again. Opened it and poured the young lady who said it was empty beer. As she is leaving, my suite mate comes in and goes to the intake and closes it. Now, my suite mate is a straight A student who gets all A's mostly due to his photographic memory. Back to the keg, so I tell him that he needs to leave the intake open to let air in to displace the beer coming out of the lower tap. He then proceeds to tell me that since the beer is carbonated, air is not needed to replace the liquid volume lost when the beer is dispensed. So I asked him 2 questions. If it is not needed, why is there the upper tap? And does he really think the amount of gas the carbonation gives off in the glass of beer is equal to the volume of the liquid beer? He thought for a few seconds, and his only response was, "I have a 4.0. What's your GPA?" Then he walked away. My petty self would have made a huge announcement to everyone at the party to pay attention and show how the keg works and call out the suite mate. Like totally saying, "Hey guys, suite mate seems to know how this keg works since he has a 4.0 GPA, so if the beer doesn't come out, have them show you." Story 21. I had a boss who was an engineer who put a couple $100s in change in a bank's pneumatic drive-through tube where it got stuck, and they had to use a jackhammer to get it out. He was upset that the bank was charging him for this because he didn't know this would happen. They had large signs saying to not put change in the tubes, including on the tubes themselves. He just filled the thing with random change, not in rolls or anything, like he thought it was a coin star. That's hilarious. Unless you were in line behind him. Yep, and it sank and got stuck underground. Way too heavy for the pneumatic system to carry it to the teller. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.